Hi, I'm Ellen Langer. Today I'm going to be talking about mindfulness. This is mindfulness without meditation. It's so simple it defies belief, but leads us to be charismatic, happy, and healthier. We make people mindful, they live longer. So stay tuned to this segment to learn more about this.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, what do you need to do in order to level up your leadership? Well, in this episode, we're going to be taking an insider look at if you're really showing up as a leader in a world where we know engagement sucks. And if you're going to be a world-class leader, you must have the self-accountability to ask yourself, are we really engaged? Each of us as leaders. Are we fully present? Are we mindful? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any episode on our past episode on our Facebook page. Just go to Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, and there you can chat about this or any previous shows. If you're a new listener, new viewer, strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We also need your help in staying relevant. It helps, so please go over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you do, please go to the Facebook group and tell us you did, and maybe we'll give you a shout out. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Georgia to Colorado Springs. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better listener. And you can also listen to us at home by going to Google Home or Alexa and saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, a leader in any capacity, you know that engagement is a real issue. Too often, our employees and team members seem distracted. It's a constant struggle to find new ways to keep our good people, to keep them in the company. But it's even more difficult to keep them engaged, and a new ping-pong table ain't going to do it. So in a world where everyone seems to be, our workforce seems to be on a varying degree living on the ADHD spectrum, how can we raise not only the engagement of our team, but also of ourselves? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest on this episode is Dr. Ellen Langer. She is a social psychologist and the first female professor to gain tenure at the Department of Psychology, Harvard University. She is an artist. She's an author of 11 books, and over the last 35 years, she's written more than 200 research articles for general and academic readers on mindfulness. She is the recipient of 4 distinguished scientific awards and the Liberty Science Genius Award. Pretty impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me welcome the Mother of Mindfulness, Dr. Ellen Langer!
Thank you, Dov.
Welcome. Subtle.
To the core.
To the core. Welcome. It's so great to have you here. I'm honored to have you here. I've been a student of mindfulness for a very, very long time, and I know that you've always been at the forefront of that. However, mindfulness is the new black. It's the cool thing. Cool leaders are doing it. And it seems from my research that very few leaders actually truly understand it. You, in many ways, as I said, the mother of this movement, you birthed the movement. And with your vast research, please share it with our viewers, our listeners, what you really believe mindfulness is. Let's get this.
Let's get down to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when many people think about mindfulness, they confuse it with meditation. Meditation is engaged to lead to post-meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as I study it, is without meditation. Not better, worse, just different, and a lot easier. It's so simple that it almost defies belief, Doug. It's the process of noticing new things. When you notice new things, you come to see, gee, you didn't know it as well as you thought you did. And then your attention naturally goes to it. So you notice new things, that puts you in the present, makes you sensitive to context and perspective. And this noticing is the essence of engagement. Now, what happens is that as you're noticing, the neurons are firing. And it turns out that after 40 years of research, I can say with a fair degree of confidence that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So we've done study after study where we increase people's mindfulness. They're more charismatic, their memory improves, they live longer, they're happier. 40 years is a long time. So I've had an opportunity to test this with many different measures. And what's behind a lot of it is the importance of uncertainty. So most of us, whether in business, in our personal lives, you go to school, you're taught absolute facts. And this creates our mindlessness. It turns out that everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So what happens is that we tend to confuse the stability of our mindsets with the stability of the underlying phenomena. So if you did nothing else, garnered nothing else from our talk today, what you should do is come to appreciate you don't know. I start off talks at these large companies and I ask a simple question. By the way, as soon as I ask it, I think that many of them are they groan, ready to leave. But the question is, how much is 1 and 1? Oh, people have been taught 1 and 1 is 2. Well, this is one of the most basic facts people have learned. And it turns out 1 and 1 is not always 2. If you add 1 pile of sand to 1 pile of sand, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 pile of laundry to 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. In fact, in the real world, 1 plus 1 probably doesn't equal 2 as often as it equals 2. I was at a horse event that changed my life. This man asked me if I'd watch his horse because he was going to go get his horse a hot dog. I'm Harvard, Yale, all the way through. I know horses are herbivorous. They don't eat meat. And I was a little smug and obnoxious, but trying to keep it to myself. He goes to get the hot dog. He comes back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And it was at that moment that I realized everything I thought I knew for certain could be wrong. All right. And so once we think we know, we don't pay any attention. There's no need to. If you knew what I was going to say now, your mind would go to other places. All right. So when we realize that context really matters, we may think we know it may be true some of the time, but not all of the time. We sit up and take notice. Now, lots of people use science as the backbone for their facts. But it turns out it doesn't matter what the science is, psychology, physics, no matter what the science is, science can only give us probabilities. It says if we were to do the exact same experiment, which we can never do exactly the same, but if we could, we're likely to get these findings. That's translated by the media, by teachers, parents, CEOs, as this is the fact. Horses don't eat meat, for example. And so once we recognize that we don't know, life becomes different. Now, what happens is that right now people know they don't know, but they think everybody else might know, so they pretend. And this is whether you're the boss or you're a worker in the company. So that people have to go from following or making a personal attribution for not knowing. I don't know, but you may know, so therefore I have to feel uncomfortable in your presence, hide my ignorance, and so on, to a universal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. And then you can be confident and uncertain. And it's also the case that as a leader, once you're aware that you might not know, you pay a different sort of attention to the people working with you. Imagine the simple example of 1 plus 1. If you were a teacher and you asked how much is 1 plus 1 and a student answered 1, you'd dismiss them. in a business sense, you might fire them and just go on. Now, when you realize that you don't know, the question when we will done, how did you come up with that? And then everybody conceivably can learn more.
One of the things that I think that most leaders need to learn, and it's one of the things that we teach in our work in consulting with companies, and particularly with leaders, is the importance of curiosity.
Well, but see, mindfulness, when you're first curious, you're likely to be mindful, but curiosity and mindfulness are not the same, because when you're curious, there's a presumption that there is an answer. Oh, I wonder what this is. And then you find out what it is. What I'm saying is, it's not that the thing that you think you found out. It may vary, and depending on context. It may look that way now and look different in the future. So curiosity is a good start.
The context will change. The context will change, but also the curiosity gives us the reason I'm saying it is because it gives us the potential for depth. It gives us the potential for looking at the next level of what we think we know. And
for sure.
And the next level, and to keep.
So being curious is certainly better than thinking you know. But if the curiosity leads you then to think now you've got the answer, then you're back where you started. So it's an unusual thing for people to learn this respect for uncertainties, and so many of us hide from it. And period.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talk about is the three most dangerous words in the world. I know that, because the mind shuts down immediately. The mind shuts down. I'm not going to listen anymore. And so one of the things that we give as guidance around that is that when immediately, because your mind is going to do that, your mind is going to say, I know that, but immediately it says, do I? You respond with, do I? And if you go, your mind, we all have an ego, the ego mind says, yes, I do know that. Do I know it fully? Or is there more I could know? Well, possibly. Am I living it? Those are deepening questions that allow us to explore. And then, as you said, and I think this is really important, is one of the things that I love about what you just said is that some things are absolutely true, except when they're not.
Right. Okay.
The context is different.
Right.
So it's absolutely true in this context, but in the next context, it might be completely wrong. Correct. It might be completely wrong. It's pitch black when you turn off the lights and I'm in the dark room. It's pitch black, and then my eyes adjust and I can see things. So is it pitch black and I can't see things, or can I see things? Is there a change in context that is how the cones of my eyes change? So I think this is it's a really great lesson for us in deepening that willingness to, as you said, to just say, I don't know, and I might know, but I might not know in this context.
Right, right. And it's also when one fully appreciates that, then they can be confident. You know, so right now,
talk to us about that, because that's counterintuitive, because everybody thinks if I know it, I'm confident. If I don't know it, I have no confidence.
Right, exactly.
You know, so talk to us about that, because there's this wonderful quote by a Shaolin master who says, a master, I just love this quote. He says, a master is from the Dancing Wuli Masters. And he says, a master is someone who does everything as if for the first time.
Right.
In the Western world, we think of a master as somebody who knows it so well they don't have to think about it. But it's like, wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, let's get back to the point that it's very easy to bring about by simply intentionally noticing new things about the person you live with, about the way you're doing whatever your job is, and so on. And then you're going to see, gee, I didn't know it as well as I thought I did. And then that's engaging, that's energizing. So that's a good thing. And so when we are told or recognize that this is the way things are and none of us know, then it becomes exciting rather than anxiety provoking. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, let's just shift the context for a minute. I don't want to come back to noticing, because I think it's important, but I want to give everybody a way to grasp this. If you take a look at when as you, the listener viewer, as you think about when you first fell in love, you noticed everything about that person.
Yeah.
You noticed their smell, you noticed the taste of their lips, you noticed the way they moved, you noticed all those things. And we used to, my wife and I taught a relationship program, and we'd ask the couples in the room, how long have you been together? And the ones who've been 10 years or more, we sat on one side, and the couples who've been together less than 5 years, we sat on the other side, and we'd say, we do a, I think it's called a newlywed game, and we sort of find out what they knew about each other. Invariably, the ones who've been together the longest knew the least about each other because they'd stop noticing. They'd
Right,
stop
exactly.
paying attention. And we could ask the husband, what color are your wife's eyes? And he'd say brown. And I'd say, what color are your eyes? And she'd say, hazel. Well, isn't that brown? No, that's hazel. But it's that, again, that assumption.
Right.
And I just love that this coming back to really paying attention. The reason I'm still in love with my wife today, and I said this to somebody just yesterday, is because I don't know her yet. And people said, well, Jesus, don't you know? I mean, you're probably the most, you really dig in there. And I said, yeah, but she's always evolving, and new things and things that I thought she didn't like, she's discovering she does. And that's the curiosity, that's the impassionment with an engagement with what it is we're doing.
Right. And, with respect to relationships, it's not just that you're not noticing who the person fully is, but that person is also changing.
Of course.
And even eye color changes. When I was young, my eyes were a very deep brown, and sadly now they're not quite as dark brown. So that if you stop looking at my eyes, even if you were fully attentive when we first got together, you'd still end up wrong. So you have both people changing, so things can be endlessly interesting.
Absolutely.
There's something else about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you want to talk about it now. I was going to say there's something else about relationships that is also true in the workplace that people don't realize, which is the simple thing that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. And when you fully grasp that, you end up non-judgmental. Now, you might have fallen in love with your wife because she was so spontaneous, but now you're annoyed with her because she's so impulsive. You loved her because she was so trusting. Now you can't bear her because she's so gullible, and so on. The point is that every behavior can be understood in equally potent but oppositely valenced ways. So you may see me as inconsistent. From my perspective, I'm being flexible, and so on, for every description. And so when we do that, people talk about changing behavior, whether it's in the workplace or in the home. You're never going to get me to stop being impulsive by asking me to stop being impulsive, because from my perspective going forward, I'm being spontaneous. Now, you can get me to look back at my behavior and say, oh my gosh, I was so impulsive, but still I'm going to keep doing it. And if you want me to stop being impulsive, then you have to get me to not value being spontaneous. And then neither of us will want me to change. We did this study ages ago. We gave people 100 or 300 behavior descriptions. We said, circle those things about yourself that you want to change, but you have trouble changing. So for me, I might circle being impulsive. And then you turn the page over, and in a mixed up order are the positive versions of all of those words. Now we ask them, circle those things you really value about yourself. Spontaneity. All right. I hate being inconsistent. I love being flexible, and so on. And so when you see the person from their perspective going forward, you appreciate them more. There's less reason to want to change them. Relationship then is going to improve. And if it's somebody working with you, for you, or somebody in a personal relationship, it's all the same. As soon as you're diminishing somebody, you're not putting yourself in a position to take full advantage of all the wonderful things they can bring to the company, to the relationship, and so on. So
that's, I mean, I just love that. And I think it's really important because I fully agree with you. Nobody's doing anything. We like to think that person's pissing me off, but nobody's sitting around thinking about how can they piss you. I mean,
right.
Most people are not sitting around thinking about how they can piss you off. Maybe your teenage kids are, but generally speaking, people are doing what they do because it makes sense to them. And this is our own emotional logic in play. It's not rational logic, it's emotional logic, and it makes sense to us. And as you said, retrospectively, we can look back and go, yeah, that was kind of daft. But at the time, it's like, no, this is what makes sense to who I am.
So for me in a relationship,
remember that everybody's trying to feel better. So whatever they're doing is just a way to feel better and a way to feel more. One of my questions is, I talk a lot about authentic leadership, and I'll ask my audience, and I'll say, okay, how many of you in this room think you're authentic? Everybody's going to put up their hand. And I said, well, so what does that mean? It's a silly question because you're only authentic in the context of what you understand. And if you look back and I say, well, were you authentic 10 years ago? People will go, no. Well, do you think 10 years from now, you'll look back? Yeah, maybe not. Okay. So it's a context of also the ability to move outside of ourselves. And so that brings us to the deeper level of mindfulness, which is self-knowledge and self-awareness. Walk us into that a little bit, Ellen, so that we can really grasp that, because I don't think people do.
Well, I think that if you know why you're doing what you do, you're protected from lots of things. You never experience regret. You never procrastinate. You never seek forgiveness. Let me tell you this forgiveness story, because this is kind of fun. Years ago, I was invited to give a sermon at a church. Now, I'm not religious, and I've spoken to large crowds. It doesn't get me nervous. But all of a sudden, for some strange reason, speaking in this church gave me cause to pause. I didn't know anything about religion. I start writing something. I said, okay, forgiveness is related. I ended up with something that was actually sacrilegious. It goes like this, the short version. If you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad, what are they going to tell you?
Yes.
It's good. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad, what are they going to tell you? It's bad.
Probably bad.
However, you have to first forgive, you have to first blame before you can forgive. So our forgivers are our blamers. Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? You blame people for bad things, but things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. It all depends on how you understand them. So what we have is people who see the world negatively, blame people, and thereby set themselves up to be forgiving. Hardly divine. All right. So what you want is to understand, and that obviates the necessity for forgiveness. Regret comes from not knowing why you did what you did. If you know that you did it because it made sense at the time, then you don't regret not doing anything other than that. Procrastination is one that's completely misunderstood. I can say everybody is procrastinating all the time. It can be looked at. For me right now, I'm not writing, I'm not painting, I'm not paying bills, but that's because I'm talking to you and your audience. All right. So there are always things we're not doing when
so right now you're procrastinating paying your bills.
One could say, but
Sure.
The way to look at it though is to recognize, to have enough self-respect. It comes back to what I was saying about realizing that your behavior, just as other people's behavior, makes sense from your perspective, or else you wouldn't have done it. And so when you knew that even if there was some wonderful opportunity and you couldn't avail yourself of it, and later you feel bad, gee, you would have made a fortune or gotten a new job or whatever it is, that you have to remember at that time and you made the decision, it felt like the right thing to do, to pass it up, to spend a quiet evening with your wife, for instance, or what have you. Mm-hmm. So as far as self-awareness goes, it part and parcel of being more mindful. That an awareness of why you're doing what you're doing sets you up for a good deal of happiness and the absence of stress that most people experience now. It's also what people don't understand with things like stress. Events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views you take of events. So if you see it as, oh my God, this is awful, the worst thing in the world, and my life is going to be painful from here on in, of course you're going to be stressed. But if you said to yourself, for this event, how else might this be seen? How might this be a blessing rather than a curse? And then let's assume that you see it as a curse. What are some of the positive advantages of whatever it is? You lose your job. People think, wouldn't that be awful? And I think no. That if there's somebody who's spending at least 40 hours a week doing something where they're worried that they're going to lose their job, that's not a life well lived. And you'd be better off doing something else. And sometimes it's hard to have the initiative to do that. So they're making it easy for you. Anyway, the point is...
Again, that's the understanding of context.
Yes, exactly.
So I'll tell you a little, which you may or may not know about me. My listeners probably do, my viewers do. That is, in June 1990, I fell off a mountain and got smashed to pieces. I was free climbing, fell 12 stories. And if somebody had come up to me and said, "This is a blessing," I'd punched them in the nose.
Right.
Because that's a dumb thing to say to somebody in the situation. Now, looking back at it, I know that it was the best thing that happened to me at that moment. It was exactly what I needed to transform my life. But it's not something that people often can't be mindful of that in the moment that it's going on. And this is an important piece. So help our listeners, our viewers grasp that, because people often say to me, "Oh, that must have changed your life." And my answer is always no. That embedded my life. It made me more egoic about staying the same. It wasn't until later there's a separate place, which is in the mindfulness and the self-awareness, where I go, it's not about the pivotal moment, which is when the event happens. It's about the choice moment when everything seems to go back to normal, and I make a left or a right or whatever it might be.
Well, okay, several thoughts. First is, just so you know, there's nice data that people who find out they have cancer, people who have heart attacks, that's when they come alive. That's kind of sad, but at least, you know, they've had some living before the game is over. And I've oh yes, okay, I forgot where I was going with that. I think that I'm thinking of compliments, for instance. It's the same story that I tell my students: don't take the compliment, because if you don't take, you can enjoy it, smile, but not think it's true across contexts and people. That if you don't take the compliment, you're not vulnerable to the insult. Okay, now that means that when you're first insulted, at that point, if that's the first time you're thinking about it and trying to diminish its meaning, what does he know? Other people might, you know, you're not going to convince yourself. In the same way here, that if you have as a general way of living an awareness that things are not this way or that way, but we have an enormous amount of control over how we experience them. So that then when you fall 12 stories, you know, you're already ready to see it differently. You know, that time in the hospital is going to give you a time to relax and not feel so much pressure, and you don't have to answer all your emails and do all these shows that you enjoy, but still it's nice to have a little respite and so on, whatever that time would buy you. But the point that people really have to understand is that events don't cause us to feel any particular way. What leads us to our feelings are our views of those events.
You brought up something there that I think is important for us to look at, which is this illusion of control that we are so very attached to. We like to think that we are in control of situations, that we're in control generally. And I think you and I would agree that it's an illusion. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I started my career studying the illusion of control. I was a graduate student at Yale, and I would do things like give people choices of lottery tickets. And this was before states gave choice, and they, you know, took it from these studies. And when you chose your lottery ticket, for example, you then thought you had more greater chance of winning it. So if I try to buy it, let's say the ticket cost you $2. If I try to buy it back, you'd want $6 from me. Wait a second, you know? And so on. So we varied lots of things that were relevant in controllable situations, but seemingly irrelevant in chance situations. So if you're drawing a high card against a Confederate, where we have him being sort of a nerd, you know, or really sharp, well, it's not going to affect which card he draws. But when you're betting against the nerd, you bet much more money than against the other. Anyway, so all of this was designed to show that people's mindlessness can be primed, you know, by using cues that are relevant in skill situations, put them in chance situations. They behave as if they have an illusion of control. Now, this is kind of complicated, but I feel compelled. After all these years, I no longer think it makes sense to call it an illusion of control. At this point now, I recognize that we have no idea what can and can't be controlled. And so the original studies started off with the notion that I do these things to people and they come away with an expectancy for success that's inappropriately higher than the objective probability would warrant. Now I realize, what am I talking about? Who decides the objective probability? And I can go into this, but we'll probably lose half of your audience. But I
you and I will have a great conversation.
Okay, well, let me just give a slight
about what we enjoy
to make it clear. So in my advanced decision making class, I say to everybody, okay, what is the likelihood if everybody who's here now returns next week? What is the likelihood that they'll have brown hair? Okay, so I go around counting 1, 2, the number of people who have brown hair. Then I go around again. I say, well, light brown, blonde, we're going to call this brown. Dark brown, we're going to call that black. And you end up with a different probability and so on. And so when we're trying, we talk about how successful is one going to be. What is the measure of success? By some measures, yes. By others, no. If you take it today, it's going to be different from if you take it next week and so on. All of this, this was done in the early 70s, has, evolved into my realizing the psychology of possibility. And that's what a lot of my work is about now. Many of the things that we would have said that can't be, we look more closely at the data. And as I said, science only gives us probabilities, and maybe they can be. And so I can give you an example of one of these studies just to make clear. That's it. We take diabetics. We have a lot of health work, but much of the work is with business. So they show up, we give them all sorts of measures, and then we're going to sit them down next to a computer and they're going to play a computer game. And there's a clock there. You'll understand why in a moment. And we tell them, change the game you're playing every 15 minutes or so. That's done just to ensure that they'll look at the clock. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. The question we're asking is, does blood sugar level follow real or perceived time? Turns out it follows perceived time, which means one can control diabetes. We have people going to sleep in a sleep lab. They wake up, the clock tells them they got 2 hours more sleep, 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. Again, biological and cognitive functions follow perceived amount of sleep. So our thoughts are very important to our well-being and to the things we can accomplish.
But that perception, so reality's perception versus what one might call objective reality, but perceptive reality. So, the something is true because we believe it to be true. And again, I've done a lot of the medical research too, and I find it fascinating because particularly the stuff that was early research done around diabetes and blood sugar levels and perceptions of time, and well, I've got to have my injection now. Well, why? So it's fascinating stuff, and that neuropolypeptide cascade that results from the brain as a result of something we perceive to be true that's got nothing to do with it. You and I both know that what's true to the mind is true to our reality. The body responds as if it was really happening. I love this stuff, and you and I can have a talk about this for a couple of weeks, not a couple of hours. But the truth of the matter is that for most people, and this is where we come full circle back to your work, for most people, even if they get that, even if they go, okay, let's take the example of blood sugar, my mind and my perception.
And how does it help them day to day?
How does that help me day to day? Because I'm working with a normal clock.
Yeah.
Right? Well, how does that help me to see Charlie as not being a douchebag and being a decent person?
Let me tell you the counterclockwise study real quickly. We took old men and we had them live in a retreat that had been retrofitted to 20 years earlier. And we had them live as if it were the past. They spoke about past things in the present tense and so on. These are men in their 80s, and that was when 80 was 80, not the new 60. As a result of this, their hearing improved, their vision improved, their memory improved, and they look noticeably younger. Now, the point of that to your listener and viewer is the amount of control we have over our health and well-being goes far, far beyond what many of us think. We have a business life where we've been brought up to believe some of us are spectacular, most of us are average, some of us forget, we're just awful. Without questioning, who decided these things? And if you're in the wonderful group, okay, that's fine. If you're in the middle group, why accept being average? And certainly if you're in the below average group, there's no reason to accept it. We change the criteria, the ranking changes. Now, so you're a CEO and you're evaluating people. If you vary the criteria on which you're evaluating them, you'll find that some of your losers are actually winners. If you go back to what I said initially about an increased respect for people, I was giving these talks in South Africa, and I was staying at this large hotel, very fancy hotel, and I was down at the pool taking a break from everything. I saw they had this expansive amount of hotel property that wasn't being used. The only person who knew about this was the young kid who set up the chairs. And if he had a conduit to people who mattered in the company, they could make far more money by making some good use of that space. But we have a clear sense, you don't know, you're worthless, you're worth something, and so on, and we give up a lot with that. So we need the people in power to become less certain, to become more mindful. And another interesting thing that we've found over many studies is that our mindfulness is contagious. So the more mindful I am, the more mindful you will be. And that, to my mind, is the most important thing that a leader can accomplish, is to provoke other people's mindfulness. And you're mindful also, you're going to avert the dangers not yet arisen, and find opportunities that otherwise would be lost.
You've said a lot of stuff that's great there, and we could certainly unpack all of it. What you're talking about in many ways is the quantum laws of probability, which says that things are not always the same, that they are different, and we can certainly go off in that direction. And also what you tied there was, and I just love it, and I think it's important for people to grasp, one of the things that I've always said is, as a leader, you have to recognize that you are the resonance of those you surround yourself with. You're going to attract people who are the resonance of who you are. And so you have to determine that. And so that mindfulness, consciousness, keeps you conscious, but it also brings everybody else to a place of consciousness, and it repels people who are not. The resonance field of that, morphogenetic field of that, will make all the difference in the world. And creating a culture of mindful people.
Yes.
If you create a culture of mindful people, but you're not mindful, it will.
Won't happen. You won't even be able to do it then.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with a lot of leadership development. We want to give this stuff to our teams, but we don't eat it, sleep it, live it, breathe it ourselves. And if we don't, we go, oh, well, we brought Dov in, or we brought Ellen in, and it didn't really change. Yeah, you know what? It's because the problem is always with the leader. It's always with the top person.
Well, it's interesting. We have common expressions like the lights on, but nobody's home, which suggests that people are aware when you're not there. So for the leader who's not there is not fooling anybody. And the impact is probably far greater than he or she thinks, even if they acknowledge that they weren't fully present. That there's a manly view that we're trying to diminish here, which is the certainty, I'm the one who knows, and so on. And when everybody accepts that they don't know, the whole culture becomes easier and more friendly. When I was doing this consulting for a very, very large power and light company, and they had this zero tolerance for accident policy. And, I said to them, all you're doing is maximizing lying. So what, that nobody creates chaos, well, except for your teenagers, as you said before, does these things on purpose. And so it may mean that you need some physical change in the company. When I was an undergraduate, I was doing this work for this professor where this was before we had fancy computers, thousands of numbers that I was supposed to be working with. And every time I did it, I got a different answer. And she got crazed. And then I said, okay, you try it. And she got crazed. And so the idea that there was an error simply meant in this context that maybe the task needed to be redefined. So you don't want to set it up so people don't reveal the mistakes. In those mistakes are opportunities.
Right.
But we don't want to be blaming people.
Yeah, that's very good. So let's dive down a little bit. Can you tilt your camera down a bit? There you go. Thank you. So one of the things that come up, you wrote a book about it too, was about now you are a gallery shown artist. You talk about mindfulness and art. Is that something that was always like I was an artist as a kid and I had stuff in galleries?
No, I was one of those kids. No, I was one of those kids who couldn't draw, and I thought those who could draw, like those who were in the band, that they weren't part of the socially sophisticated set, And now, of course, I wish that I could play the piano or one of those instruments, but I do paint. So I couldn't paint. And then I was working on a book about evaluation, and I started to paint, and it was great fun. And I didn't know if it was any good, and it was hard to find out if what I did was any good, because there are those people, if they knew I did it, they would just say it was good. And there were just as many, if they knew I did it, would say it wasn't good. So I went into this art store and asked the salesperson who didn't know me whether I should keep it or paint over it to save money on a canvas or whatever. And I started to, I just exploded. It was just so much fun. And it gave me, what I would do is I would do something on the canvas. I would have an experience, and then I'd say, gee, is this just true for me or for everyone? So then I'd become a psychologist again. I do the experiments, and I go back and forth with that. And it's wonderfully, wonderfully engaging. I took this painting that I was very proud of, and I was going to enter it in this show at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. And there are two categories. You have juried shows and member shows. Well, I was so ignorant at the time, I didn't, realize the difference. A member shows, if you're a member, you can show. A juried show, somebody's going to pass judgment. And I had seen the member show, and I thought, all right, I can bring mine in. I walked in and I saw these paintings, and I turned around with the painting and I started to walk out. And then I said, wait, I can't be writing a book about the mindlessness of evaluation and not, give myself, and run from being negatively evaluated. And it was interesting. The painting was accepted, and now I had a whole other group of people who were upset at me. It evolved. The work on mistakes came from the painting, where I'd paint, I'd make a mistake, I'd go to fix it, and I'd do something wrong. And by being mindful at that moment, because you're mindless when you make the mistake, you realize, and at this point you're mindful. Now you have a choice. Are you going to try to go back to where you were or go forward? And through complicated studies, we teach people to go forward with it. And the products they produce, paintings, essays, physical products, when they've made a mistake, those products are rated as better than when they were mindlessly produced. So mistakes are friends. Mistakes tell us that we weren't there, and now we have an opportunity to be there.
So they're kind of like a bumper that says we're fully present.
Yeah, the important thing is that taking the product and that had the mistake and then going forward with it, you end up with something better than you were doing originally. And so this also
Fascinating.
taught me something about decision making. I write about and research, talk about decision making quite a bit. That what happens is once we make a decision, we act as if, let's use the painting example. I dip the paintbrush in one color, and then I look up, it was the wrong color, so I made a mistake. Now, I had just decided moments before what color to use. But the moment we decide, we act as if we had always, and all sensible people in the world would have come to that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And then deviating from it is costly, rather than realizing we could have decided many different things. So whenever you make a mistake, and whenever you make a decision and you think you should have decided otherwise, what you're doing is presuming that had you decided otherwise, that then everything would be blissful. You don't have any evidence for that, right? Should I marry you? Should I hire you, or should I hire John? I hire you and you're a screw up. Damn it, I should have hired John. But maybe John would have been a bigger screw up.
Yeah.
So you see
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with somebody recently about intuition. And I said, how do you know intuition works? I'm not saying for or against, I'm asking, how do you know? And they said, well, you're guided and you have these things. I said, listen, I want you to think about intuition from a different point of view. I said, I want you to imagine you're driving home and you get this intuition to go left instead of going straight, and you take a different route home. And they go, yeah? And I go, okay. And nothing happens. You get home. Did your intuition work, or was it something else? And they go, well, I guess that was something else. I said, no, why couldn't that be intuition?
Right.
Maybe there was something shittier you don't know. If you could have gone off the road or a car come out and hit you, you don't know. So sometimes your intuition is taking you on the wrong, quote unquote, path so that you avoid something. And it's just this you ever the third multi-dimensional, multi-parallel universe aspect of, that's what I love about what you're saying, is like looking at it as if you sort of elevate above these possibilities, which allows you to then say, what if this is a fantastic decision that just looks like shit?
Well, but we
have, and that's why I think it is, but it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have to be careful because people think that their gut response, their intuition, is telling them something that's necessarily correct. But what they don't realize is that gut response is often a function of their mindlessness from the past. So you hear a song played a particular way, you decide that's the way it should be played. Later, when it's played differently, it feels wrong. Well, it's not wrong. It's just different from what you originally learned. I know that your listeners dying to hear this, but they really don't want to. Am I going through the mindful decision theory? But let me just give you the bottom line to it, and anybody who's interested can find out more. After a lot of thinking about this, you end up, rather than try to make the right decision, what we should be doing is make the decision right.
Okay, walk us through that a bit. That's fabulous.
Well, okay. I don't know if a lot will get lost. Okay, so let me
sort of grasp that.
Okay. Well, the first thing, when people think they should be doing cost-benefit analyses, that stems from the mindless assumption that things are either good or bad. As we said now many times, things are in and of themselves neither good nor bad. So if the same thing is, if I say to you, do you want to meet my friend John? He's very impulsive. No, you don't want to meet him. So you want to meet my friend John? He's very spontaneous. Yeah, you want to meet him. And when you do this with everything, your costs and benefits are going to cancel out. So it can't tell you how to respond. Secondly, when we're pulling in information to help us make a decision, there's no natural endpoint to the amount of information we could consider. And each new piece of information could change the decision. All right. So it's also the case that when you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, even if we didn't realize that every cost was a benefit and every benefit a cost, there's no natural endpoint to the potential costs or the potential benefits that that one should consider. So that when you think about this, but not in the 3 minutes listening to us now, you end up with, gee, you can't make a right decision. You can't know if the decision is right. You can't. Life is unpredictable. We keep saying this, that things are always changing, which is another reason you can't make a right decision, because it's all based on information from the past that may not be true any longer. And so you're put in a position where I advise, rather than worrying about making the right decision, make the decision right.
I love it. I love it. That's fabulous. You've been doing this work for a very long time, and I know you've done a lot of media, and so we're honored to have you here. So, I've been doing this show for 11 years, so I'm gonna put it out there. What's one thing that you wish hosts would ask you about that they don't?
I don't think that way. If I wanted you to ask me something, I'd work it into the conversation. I wouldn't wait for you to ask me. So it's never going to be an issue. The main thing is that I thought you were going to ask me, don't these things get old? And they don't get old because there are always subtle differences to the timing, to the particular answer that I'm going to give, even though it may sound pretty much the same. An example comes to mind that's totally ridiculous, but let me share it. I have this friend who, when I was younger, and she has an afro, a white girl with an afro. She'd take a shower. She'd come out of the shower. I'm waiting for us to go out to dinner or lunch or whatever. And she'd be combing her hair, but her hair didn't move. It was a tight afro in the shower, except there were tiny changes. A little hair here that no one in the world would notice, but she would notice it, and so on. And the point is, by noticing these small things, everything stays new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important. Let me ask you this question. How important, in the context of what you've been talking about, how important do you believe it is to be a purpose-driven leader?
I'm not sure what a purpose-driven leader is. I think that more important is to be a mindful leader, and that sometimes the purpose, if we're supposed to make cars, or we're supposed to solve some automobile any kind of problem, technical problem, and so on, that in being narrowly geared in that direction, you're going to miss other opportunities. And so in some sense, the more we know, the stupider we become, because you end up with tunnel vision. So when a purpose leader, anybody driven by purpose, not a gentle purpose that takes you from one place to the next, but if you're firm in what you're looking for, then you're goal driven, and that's mindless.
I agree with that.
What you want to be is have a gentler sense of where you're going. I ask people, that if you were going to predict, in making your predictions, predict today and you lose tomorrow, because your predictions are like glasses that funnel information in, and anything that's not relevant to that prediction goes by the by. Where that other information could be crucial to some new idea that is percolating, that one of your workers or you yourself might have come to if only you were present to receive it.
That's interesting, because one of the things that I discuss with people often is, I'll say, do you know your purpose? Because our work is helping people to find their purpose.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
No,
it's not an insult at all. Please. And you'll see why in a minute, because I'll say, do you have your purpose? And they'll say, yes. And I'll say, okay, so tell me what it is. And invariably, it's not their purpose. It's some bullshit mission statement with a lick of paint that they tried to spruce up. And I'll say, okay, so can you tell me the difference between the mind's purpose, like a willful purpose, and a soulful purpose? And they go, no. And I say, a mindful purpose is this. It's that's where I'm going. That's the goal. And I'm going to go there no matter what. And when I hit the wall, I'll just keep hitting the wall until I go through the wall. And I say, is that good? And they go, yeah. I go, no, that's terrible.
Right.
And they go, well, what's the difference? I said, soulful purpose is agility. It's a presence. It's a willingness to stay present and say, this is what pulls me, but I have to have the agility to move around the things, to have gentleness, to have compassion, to have empathy for myself and for others, in understanding that this is a winding river. It's not an autobahn.
Right. No, that's perfect. But it's also the case, if you think about that, your goals, your routines, let's leave it at that, are determined now and are going to direct you into the future. Imagine if 10 years ago, what goals you had, and if they were still directing you, we'd be directed by our teenage selves. That's kind of scary. So that you want to, again, have conditional understandings and sort of, I think I'm going in this direction, but who knows? Now, people talk about commitment. It's the same sort of thing that, that I pledge I'm going to love you forever. Well, I'm going to stay married to you forever. And now it's 10 years down the road and we can't stand each other. It doesn't make sense to stay together. No. And the same thing with a business deal. Now, this, I know I'm not advocating this, or I think I am right this minute, but I haven't had this thought before, because you have all these business contracts that are pledges that no matter how much I don't want to do this, I'm going to do it. Seems to me there's probably a better way, that a business deal should be where both people thrive, both people feel they're winning, and both people should be concerned with the other parties winning and losing. And, so everything is organized in a terrible way, Dov. We have a lot of work changing this world.
I agree. So as a mindful human being, as somebody who is committed to that, you probably more than most people would understand the need to keep evolving, to keep growing, to keep developing yourself. And it's always my goal to make sure that our viewers, our listeners, don't look at you, me, and go, oh, I want to be where they are, because that's not their path. And it's easy to see me as being all that in a bag of chips, or you as all that in a bag of chips. But in order to bring that home for people, tell us something that you're working on in yourselves. How are you, what is it, something that you're still going, you know what, I still want to develop that. I still want to get better at that. I want to be deeper in whatever it is.
I don't live that way. It's more moment to moment. And, if something happens and it didn't go just as I thought it might, then I might take a step back and think how I might have done it differently. But I define the far end of the optimism continuum. And so since, as I said, outcomes are neither good nor bad, almost everything that I experience is working. I don't know if that's how that sounds. I don't mean to sound, that I think it's, that, I have friends who say, they want to be nicer. I say, so be nicer. It doesn't take anything.
It's, what's his name, that famous comedian, old school, and he plays a therapist, and woman says, I'm afraid of small places. And he's charging her for therapy. It's $5 for 5 minutes. And she says, I'm afraid of small spaces. He says, then don't go into them.
Right. Bob Newhart.
And he says, if you don't do it now, if you don't stop worrying about it, I'm going to lock you in a small space. And that's what it is. I mean, it's like, I saw that clip and went, oh my God, like I'm trained as a therapist, 35 years ago. And I was like, that's my kind of therapy.
Right. If it hurts, don't do it. But
maybe you want to do something else.
But I think that most of the things that people think they can't do or that scare them are things that they're actually already doing in other contexts, and they need to be made aware of that. So public speaking is one of the major stresses for people. So I teach a large lecture class in health psychology, and I ask these Harvard students, how many of you are afraid of public speaking? And virtually every hand goes up. And I say, okay. And then I start picking them at random, cover lots of them. And I ask them questions. And I say, you've all just spoken in public. what's the fear? And I said, oh yeah, but you won't, make me feel bad or whatever. So then we go through, people don't make you feel anything, you're choosing to feel that way. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, how did I get into that? Maybe you said you were a therapist. I don't know, but whatever it is.
So I want to ask you a couple of things here. First of all, in a time where it appears that any opinion will offend somebody, let me ask you, Ellen, because you're a wise woman. What might be perceived as your bravest opinion?
I don't know if I have a brave opinion. I think it may be, I would say that, well, see, it's interesting. What is opinion and what is hypothesis, which is just an opinion until it's
but with a
shown.
Good scientific word.
So I guess it's, I go back to what I keep saying about we have so much more control. We're doing lots of research with chronic illness rather, to lead to chronic health. And I think that the hardest of these chronic illnesses that the medical world thinks are genetically determined, that I think that we can change psychologically. So is that an opinion?
Yeah.
A hypothesis, a prediction?
Well, it's certainly, the epigenetics of the mind, right? And how all that, every cell in our body is responsive to what we think. Again, that cascade of neuropolypeptides, and we forget that so often. We go, oh, well, you've got a white coat on, so you must know better. Well,
and then we just turn ourselves over to them.
Exactly. Tell us what's a guilty pleasure for Dr. Ellen Langer.
Well, so you keep asking me these questions that make me feel, I don't have any guilty pleasures. I have pleasures that others might not approve of.
Okay, good. Give us one of those.
Okay. I eat a lot of chocolate. More than on occasion, I'll smoke. And that, given that I study health, that's a big no-no. But I do it because, I was such a good girl all my life. And now I like being a rebel. And I like people looking at me askance. And it turns out that the rest of my life is stress-free. I'm able to afford to eat well, to breathe fresh air, and so on. My lungs are clear. And I'm probably healthier than most people, according to the doctors at least. So I don't, and then I say to people, I'm too old to die young, if I can't persuade them. And then, then it's like everything else, that it depends on the way you do it. So if you smoke and you take a drag of a cigarette, that's very different from, but I like it for reasons that probably will speak to the other things you asked me that I was too cowardly to answer. That because smoking is so forbidden, that it allows me, so I have very strong rescue fantasies, and I can pick up everybody's discomfort. And as I said, the light's on, but nobody's, it, they're suffering in some way, they're mindless. I can leave the interaction, the party, and go have a cigarette. Everybody thinks, okay, she's addicted. And it allows me to transition rather than feel I have to take care of everybody. Now, as a therapist, but there are probably other ways for me to deal with this. So, but you asked, and I'm surprised.
Well, that's great.
I'm surprised that I answered so honestly.
Well, I really appreciate that, because one of the central pieces of the work that we do is that true leadership requires vulnerability. And there is no vulnerability without courage, and courage is subjective. So there are things I do that people go, oh my God, you're so courageous. It ain't courageous for me, it's just what I do. There are other things that I don't do that scare the shit out of me, that other people it's easy for. And so when somebody is open and vulnerable about something that's not a normal part of their conversation, I am genuinely honored and blessed and feel like, thank you for sharing that, because it's the vulnerability is your humanity. You, the leader, as you listen to this, is your humanity, and that's what bonds us. The people who are connected to you, care about you the most, they're the ones who know your shit, and you know theirs. You just don't throw it at each other. but you hold each other in there and go, okay, I get it. I get that Ellen was a good girl and there's a little girl inside of her going, fuck you, mom and dad, I'm having a cig. But that's okay. And that's, it's all right. It's grasping that and having the humanity around that I think is so powerful that it lets people in. And we're so busy trying to build this image of who we are rather than being who we are. It's such power because we lead wonderfully from that.
If you had asked me what am I most proud of, then it'd also be a surprise answer. That the thing that I'm proudest of is my willingness to sing, because I can't carry a tune. It's very easy to speak to large groups, to try to solve certain equation, whatever, because I've done it before and I know I can do it. But to be willing to sing, knowing that I can sing. So I said this to a friend. This is cute. We were talking. I don't know how it came to this, and I said that I can't carry a tune, and she said, "Oh, yes, you can, just not very far."
I love that.
Wonderful answer, isn't it?
I love that.
Yeah, because when I tell my students, can be done in corporations as well. I tell them, I don't want you to come to class next week unless you're wearing 2 different shoes. And it's very hard for people. I say, nobody who loves you is going to stop liking you or caring about you because you're wearing 2 different shoes. Nobody who doesn't know you is going to care that you're wearing 2 different shoes. So one of my students is coming up to the seminar, and she says, Professor Langer, I'm in the elevator with this guy, she's wearing 2, and he looks at my shoes, and he looks at my face, and he looks at my shoes, and he looks at my face, looks at my shoes, and says, was that intentional? She looked at his shoes, looked at his face, looked at his shoes, looked at his face, and said, was that? And by her standing tall, he didn't have to shrink, but he did. But the point is, we have to give up that there are these single ways of doing things, and that other people have the answers. And I think that if you stand tall and you're real and you know why you're doing what you're doing, life just becomes much simpler.
That's beautiful. I love that. What a great place to finish. Please tell our audience where they can tap into. I know you have a massive amount of resources, but where they can find out more about you and all the things that you offer, all your resources.
Well, you can go to ellenlanger.com. You can go to the Langer Mindfulness Institute.com. One of those is better than the other, but I couldn't tell you which one, so try them both. Langer Mindfulness Institute, ellenlanger.com. Some people just Google me and lots of things come up, and talks that I've given and what have you. Both of those sites that I gave should have a list of my books. And these mindfulness books are written for general public, and they're easy reading. They're actually fun, I think. So that's a good place to start.
Wonderful. Well, this has been an absolute joy. I really enjoyed it. And of course, we will make sure that we post those URLs on along with all the show notes. I want to thank you so much. I've loved having this conversation. Thank you. It's been a blessing and an honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, as always, information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. Become mindful, apply it. Don't just listen. Listen again. Take some notes. Get present with it. It will change everything. And remember, you can chat about this show or any past episodes in our Facebook group. Just look for Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast. And remember, the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies often face a challenge that is that they're spending a fortune training and developing their talent only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and development of your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. Fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W. And there you can get your self-assessment test and show you the 5 areas of leadership that will make you most strong. To find out more about hiring me, Dov Barron, as your speaker or strategist for your organization, simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/ speaking. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about whether you are actually present in mind as well as body. I'm Dov Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.